She told me with a smile that it was better if we were just friends, but when she found out someone else would take her place on our trip, her idea of friendship drastically changed, and her smile disappeared. My name is Ian. I met Ava during the last semester of my master's degree. I was finishing my civil engineering studies at Johns Hopkins, and she was studying interior design, dreaming of opening her own consulting firm. From the start, I was captivated by her creative energy, her ambition to transform ordinary spaces into authentic works of art. She was magnetic. We started dating just as I got my first job at an engineering firm in Baltimore, and she was venturing into the uncertain world of freelance work. Very soon, without planning it, I became the economic support of our relationship. Her income was unpredictable. There were months when she earned well with a residential project, and others when she could barely cover her most basic expenses while running from one networking event to another, looking for opportunities that might not materialize. I didn't mind covering most of our expenses. We rented an apartment together in downtown Baltimore 6 months into dating, with a monthly rent of $2,800. Between utilities, which cost another $300 and $600 for groceries, because she insisted on organic food and ordered takeout when she was overwhelmed with work, my contributions easily reached $3,200 a month. In her best months, her contribution didn't exceed $800. I wasn't bothered because I firmly believed we were building a future together. She spoke enthusiastically about her business, the high-level clients she would have, the house we would buy, and the wedding we would someday plan. I believed her. I saw in her a talent and determination that, in my mind, could only lead her to success. Ava dedicated herself to training with admirable intensity. Design conferences in major cities, specialized courses in sustainable architecture, networking with contractors and real estate developers. None of that was cheap, but she assured me that every expense was a necessary investment to position herself in a competitive market. When she needed $1,500 for a 3-day convention in Chicago or $800 for a course on ecological materials, I simply made the transfer. I trusted her instinct and our shared vision. Without realizing it, I ended up financing not only her career, but the lifestyle she considered essential to win over her clients: expensive clothes, dinners at trendy restaurants, memberships at exclusive gyms. She justified every expense because she believed it was part of a common project. At night, while she worked on designs and sketches on the sofa with fabric samples and her laptop on her lap, I watched her, convinced that my support was an investment, not a unilateral sacrifice. She had a particular way of making me feel indispensable. She would tell me that my stability gave her the freedom to take risks and grow without fear. "You are my base," she used to whisper to me on Sunday mornings as we planned the week. "I couldn't do any of this without you." And I truly believed it. For 3 years, I carried that role with pride. While she dreamed of expanding her business, I was already looking for engagement rings and calculating how much we could invest in a house when her income stabilized. Our great shared dream was a Mediterranean cruise. We had mentioned it many times since college, traveling the coasts of Italy and Greece together, walking through ancient cities, experiencing something that felt like a reward for everything we had built. When Ava secured an important contract to design the interior of a new boutique hotel in Harbor East, I knew it was the perfect time. Without telling her, I paid a $500 non-refundable deposit to secure the exact trip we had looked at so many times online. I imagined her reaction when I handed her the documents on our 3rd anniversary. I imagined her excited, hugging me, convinced, like me, that we were ready to take the next step. But shortly after making that reservation, something began to change. It wasn't overnight, but looking back, the signs were there. Ava started coming home later, claiming dinners with clients and networking meetings. She started leaving her phone face down every time she entered the room and going out onto the balcony to take calls that, according to her, were about confidential projects. I, completely confident in her, took it as part of her career growth. I thought she was expanding her network, and that all of it was positive for her professional future. I never imagined that this stage would be the silent breaking point that was about to arrive. Her transformation began subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a breeze you don't notice at first, but which over time becomes a constant wind pushing everything around it. At first, they were simple details. Posts on social media that had nothing to do with her work as a designer, but with phrases about freedom, intensity, authenticity, and that romantic idea of living in the present that she barely mentioned before. What were once photos of carefully designed interior environments or satisfied clients began to mix with images of new bars, art exhibitions in places I didn't even know, and evenings in places that were not part of our routine. Every post carried phrases loaded with a tone I didn't recognize. Life begins outside your comfort zone. If you don't take risks, you don't grow. Routine is the enemy of passion. When I asked her about these events, Ava always had a ready answer. Sometimes she said they were professional commitments, other times that she had gone with her design group to connect with creative people. I believed her at first. We had been together for 3 years, and until then, trust had been a firm foundation between us. But that foundation began to crack when the name Logan began to creep into our conversations like a shadow that grew a little more each day. Logan was a photographer. According to her, he worked with designers to document projects and had a different energy. She spoke to me about his travels with an excitement she no longer showed with me, that he had returned from Costa Rica after covering a wedding, that he traveled the Blue Ridge Mountains on a motorcycle with his camera around his neck, that he had that wild and free artistic vision that inspired her. Logan says creativity needs constant movement, she commented one night while leaving her purse on the table, after an opening I hadn't been invited to. He believes that routine is a poison that kills inspiration. That phrase stung like a pin, not because it was wrong itself, but because of the way she said it, with admiration, with a gleam in her eyes, as if she had discovered a new language and I had been rendered mute. At the same time, our intimacy began to fade like a flame that is consumed without one immediately noticing. Every time I sought a moment to be together, Ava had an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, too focused on her career. What used to be long conversations in which we dreamed of buying a house, traveling, starting a family was reduced to simple schedule coordination. What time do you get home? What day are you free? I can't this weekend. When I tried to approach her by proposing weekend getaways, something as simple as visiting another state, exploring new restaurants, or just having time for ourselves, she replied that her career was at a key moment and that she couldn't take unnecessary breaks. However, she always found time for those dinners, exhibitions, or events to which, curiously, I was not welcome. The emotional distance became increasingly evident. I started to feel like a guest in a story that was once mine. The same woman who previously spoke of stability, of building a future together, now made comments admiring other professionals who led more chaotic lives but were full of emotion. Maybe we got too comfortable, she said one night while having dinner at our usual restaurant. She was looking intently at her cell phone, scrolling through photos of another of Logan's trips. Sometimes I feel like we are missing out on things that could change everything. I tried to respond with openness. I proposed doing different things, giving our relationship more dynamism. But every proposal of mine seemed like a shadow next to the colorful world she imagined. While I spoke of weekend getaways, she dreamed of flights to Europe, creative sessions on the other side of the country, dinners surrounded by people who lived without plans. What I didn't understand at that moment, although it is obvious now, is that emotionally, Ava was no longer with me. She stayed in our house because of the comfort I represented, economic stability, a well-organized home, a mapped-out life plan. Meanwhile, her mind was already traveling with Logan and everything he symbolized for her. The breakup arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't an argument or an outburst, but a perfectly calculated scene. We had gone to Amore, our favorite Italian restaurant, the place where we celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, achievements, and where I, naively, planned to give her the documents for a cruise I had booked as a surprise. I had put effort into every detail, the same table as always, the cozy corner she liked so much, white wine, her favorite, and a small folder with the trip itinerary. Ava arrived punctually, dressed in one of those elegant outfits she usually wore when she wanted to make a good impression, but something in her body language made me feel that it wasn't a normal night. She avoided looking at me directly, swirled the wine glass between her fingers, and seemed to be searching for words she couldn't find. "Ian, we need to talk about us," she finally said, interrupting my story about a new project at the company. I felt a hollow pit in my stomach before I even heard what was coming. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued. "I think we would be better off as friends. We have grown in different directions, and we no longer want the same things." The way she said it threw me off. There were no tears. No anger, not even sadness. Just coldness. 3 years reduced to a, "we would be better off as friends." "What are you saying?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. "We've been planning our future for months." Then she told me. She had been emotionally involved with Logan for 2 months. What I thought were work dinners were nights with him. What I assumed were work obligations were actually moments of connection with someone else. "Logan understands my artistic vision in a way that you never could," she said with an excitement she hadn't shown me in a long time. "He's spontaneous. He lives intensely. With you, everything is so structured, so predictable." I watched her, trying to recognize the woman I had shared so many plans with on her face. "So, while I was building a life with you, you were emotionally giving it to someone else?" I replied with a lump in my throat. "I wouldn't call it cheating," she replied, without showing a drop of regret. "We simply connected in a way that made me see what we were missing. You are a good man, Ian, but you are not the man I need for this stage of my life." And as if all that weren't enough, she dropped the phrase that completely shattered any remnant of respect I might have had left. "We could still do the cruise together, though. I know you already paid the deposit. It would be a shame to waste such a beautiful trip just because we are redefining our relationship." Logan thinks traveling can help us heal. The way she pronounced redefining was sickening. For her, it wasn't even a breakup. It was a change of status from partner to occasional sponsor of her adventures. At that moment, I realized that for Ava, I was no longer a life partner. I was an economic safety net she planned to cling to, even after choosing someone else. At that moment, I understood something that had been in front of me all along, even though I had refused to accept it. For her, I was not a partner on equal terms, but a stable financial source who should be grateful for her attention while financing the lifestyle she enjoyed so much. "Do you really want me to take you on a romantic cruise after telling me you're in love with another man?" I asked her, unable to believe the level of audacity she had. She, with a rehearsed and manipulative tone, replied, "It doesn't have to be romantic. We can simply enjoy each other's company and celebrate the good times we shared. You've always been my best friend, beyond everything else." Her capacity to completely ignore the damage she had done to me was stunning. While she spoke, she calmly sipped her wine, telling me how she had fallen in love with another man, and on top of that she had the audacity to suggest that I should pay for a vacation where she would probably be texting her new romantic interest from the deck chairs that would come out of my pocket. I took a deep breath and kept my voice firm, despite the fury boiling inside me. "Let me see if I understand," I said calmly. "You've been emotionally cheating on me for months. You are ending our 3-year relationship for a photographer who, according to you, represents everything I am not. And on top of that, you expect me to reward that betrayal by financing the dream trip we planned together." Her look of surprise was almost comical, as if she truly believed I would accept her new dynamic with gratitude. "Ian, you're exaggerating," she said with an air of superiority. "Relationships evolve, and sometimes people realize they are better off as friends. We don't have to throw away all the good things we built." Her level of self-indulgence left me speechless. She had slowly destroyed what we had while enjoying the financial security I provided, and yet she pretended to continue benefiting from everything without providing loyalty or commitment. I looked at her closely. That woman who had shared my bed and my dreams for 3 years was no longer the same. She was a complete stranger who had used me as a safety net while seeking more intense emotions elsewhere. "You know what, Ava? You're right," I replied with a serenity that completely unsettled her. "We are better off as friends. In fact, you just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Her confident smile faltered for the first time. It was clear she expected tears, pleas, or at least a desperate reaction. Not this firm calmness. I took out my wallet, left enough cash to pay for both meals and a generous tip. I stood up and told her, "Enjoy your new adventure with Logan. I hope he is everything you think I am not." I walked out of that restaurant with a clarity I couldn't remember feeling in a long time. It was as if the door to an invisible prison I had been locked in without noticing had been opened for me. Instead of returning to the apartment we shared, I drove directly to my colleague Derek's house and asked if I could stay on his sofa for a few days while I organized my things. That same night, while Ava was surely celebrating her freedom with Logan, I returned to the apartment, packed my essential belongings, and moved out without making a scene. I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. "I respect your decision. The lease is in your name, so the place is yours. I will cover my share of the utilities until the end of the month." There were no confrontations or dramatic scenes, just a clean, rational closure, as I had always handled things in our relationship. I took a week off work, something I almost never did, and dedicated it to reconnecting with myself, away from the burden of being her financial and emotional provider. For the first time in years, I didn't have to calculate budgets to cover expenses that weren't mine, or worry about impulse purchases by others. The sense of relief was overwhelming, almost liberating. I went back to climbing at the local gym, one of my passions that I had neglected when Ava complained that my active weekends interfered with her social events and networking opportunities. Feeling the physical effort, tackling complicated routes, and concentrating on every move restored a vitality that had been dormant for too long. I also took my old camera out of the closet and began exploring the architecture and docks of Baltimore, rediscovering the pleasure of photography that I had abandoned by focusing exclusively on supporting her creative aspirations while neglecting my own. During those days of personal reconstruction, I settled one by one the practical aspects of our separation. I closed the shared bank account after transferring her share. I removed her from my car insurance and paid the penalty myself for terminating the lease early. I preferred to assume the cost rather than having to coordinate with someone who no longer had any emotional connection with me. The most liberating thing of all was cutting off contact completely. I blocked her number, deleted her from all my social media, and asked mutual friends not to inform me of her life. It wasn't revenge. It was self-care. She had made it clear that I was dispensable to her. Now it was my turn to show that my peace didn't depend on her presence. Shortly after, I attended an engineering conference downtown. There, I met Sophie, a landscape architect from a firm that often collaborated on municipal projects with civil engineers. She was brilliant, had a great sense of humor, and above all was transparent. Nothing like the emotional manipulation or financial dependence that had marked my previous relationship. What started as a conversation about sustainable urban planning naturally transformed into weekend getaways to state parks in Maryland, where we shared deep conversations and a genuine enthusiasm for our passions. It was in that environment, away from Ava's shadow, that I rediscovered not only what I deserved, but also who I was when I was no longer supporting someone else. Sophie always valued aspects of my personality that would have been a source of ridicule or criticism for others. For her, my logical way of thinking, my obsession with carefully planning every step, and my constancy were not flaws to be corrected, but strengths that provided structure and security to life. She saw me as stable, reliable, someone she could lean on, without fear of everything falling apart overnight. In contrast, Ava, blinded by the mirage of adventure, decided to bet on what she thought was passion, freedom, and limitless emotion. Logan. He represented the complete opposite of me, and in her mind, that was what she needed to feel alive. What she didn't realize is that that initial enthusiasm would disappear almost as quickly as the morning dew when reality set in. As soon as she discovered that being with Logan wasn't an endless journey of adrenaline and romantic getaways, but a real relationship that involved responsibilities, mutual support, and coherence, her fantasy began to crumble. Logan never intended to financially support anyone else. His bohemian life as a freelance photographer sounded charming in theory, but it was far from stable. For him, sharing an impromptu dinner after a shoot or launching into a trip with just enough money might have been exciting, but for Ava, it wasn't enough. She had become accustomed to me, without her explicitly asking, taking care of a large part of her expenses and maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own. It didn't take long for the sparkle she saw in Logan to fade. Just 6 weeks after they made their relationship official, he started slowly distancing himself. Less frequent messages, canceled plans, empty promises. That initial intensity that Ava had mistaken for true love dissolved, leaving her in a constant state of anxiety, trying to recreate a fire that no longer existed. Ironically, she herself had destroyed what was stable and lasting with me to pursue that fleeting illusion. And as if life were responsible for making her pay the full bill, her professional career began to collapse at the same time. Her profile as an interior designer, which once projected sophistication, began to deteriorate with every impulsive post. Instead of showing only elegant projects, her social media account filled with emotional venting, veiled criticism of men who don't understand sensitive souls, and generalized criticism of masculinity. Those outbursts were interspersed with photos of expensive furniture or luxurious spaces, giving a contradictory and unprofessional image. Clients who once saw her as a talented designer began to distrust her. No one wants to hand over their home remodel to someone who publicly broadcasts emotional instability, and in that same period, Ava made one of the costliest mistakes of her life. She had quit her administrative job at an architecture firm as soon as Logan promised her they would travel together, that they would create a shared artistic project, and that she could dedicate herself exclusively to creating. None of that happened. Economic reality hit her mercilessly. Logan couldn't support her, and her freelance income evaporated as her reputation plummeted. Even her circle of friends began to distance themselves. No one wants to be the person who listens to the same repeated drama every weekend, using different words. Why doesn't he call me? Why isn't he looking for me? What did I do wrong? 2 months after our breakup, when the fantasy had no sustenance, the digital smoke signals began. First were the likes on old photos, immediate views of my stories, small gestures disguised as coincidences. When she saw that I didn't respond, the next stage came. Direct messages, some full of dramatic apologies and others with reproaches disguised as sentimental complaints. "I know I hurt you, but we shared something real for 3 years," she wrote one night using a mutual friend's account after I blocked her main profiles. "You can't pretend that means nothing. I'm going through a very difficult time and I need someone who understands me." By then, I already knew her financial problems were serious. Logan had never promised to pay her anything, and she had built a relationship on a mirage. Without fixed income, with clients moving away, and without her usual network of people willing to rescue her, she began to despair. And that desperation grew exponentially when she discovered, through her own social media surveillance tactics, that I was dating Sophie. That was the spark that ignited her most intense campaign, an emotional crusade to recover what, in her mind, she considered hers. She began writing to me more frequently, creating fake accounts to view my posts, and trying to use mutual friends as intermediaries, until finally, on a Thursday morning, she crossed the line. She showed up unannounced at the reception of my engineering firm building in downtown Baltimore. Somehow, I still don't know how she managed it. She convinced the guard she was my fiancé and that she was bringing my forgotten lunch. The receptionist called me, uncomfortable, to let me know that a distressed woman was insisting on seeing me urgently. When I went downstairs, I found her nervously pacing the marble floor of the lobby. She looked distraught, her clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared, and a trembling cell phone in her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. As soon as she saw me, She ran toward me as if clinging to her last chance to save something. "Ian, thank God," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been trying to talk to you for weeks. We need to talk about us, about everything that happened." Maintaining my composure, I took a deep breath. I knew several of my colleagues were watching from the elevator area. "There is no us to talk about, Ava," I replied firmly. "You made that clear when you chose Logan." Her mask cracked. She began stammering justifications. She said Logan was manipulative and controlling, that he had left her isolated and dependent on him, and then disappeared when real problems appeared. "You would never have done that to me," she sobbed. "You genuinely wanted to build something lasting." It was almost grotesque to hear her complain about having been used when her own actions towards me had been almost identical. I didn't say it out loud. There was no need. My silence was enough. I made it clear that what she experienced with Logan had nothing to do with me, and that she had to leave before I called security. And that's when all her desperation turned into fury. She shouted loudly, causing the entire lobby to fall silent. "You owe me that cruise," she bellowed. "I invested 3 years of my life building a future with you. You can't just leave me like this over a mistake." She wasn't shouting out of love. She was shouting because she realized she had lost her source of stability, the security she took for granted. Her claim was not that of a remorseful woman. It was that of someone convinced she had the right to continue taking advantage of what I had built with effort. At that moment, it became clear to everyone present that she wasn't seeking reconciliation. She only wanted to regain access to the comfort I had given her for years. I will never forget the desperate tone with which she shouted, "I deserve that vacation more than any stranger you barely know." The security guards were already approaching when Ava made her last attempt to recover something she had lost long ago. She said that Sophie was just a transition relationship, and that I was making a mistake by preferring someone new over the deep history that, according to her, we shared. "She doesn't know you like I do," she yelled, as the agents firmly, but not violently, escorted her toward the exit. "You are going to regret this when you realize what you are throwing away for a stranger who doesn't understand what we built." Several people witnessed that spectacle. My project manager, 2 clients who had arrived for a meeting, and several co-workers. That public scene clearly revealed what many only suspected, the manipulation and overwhelming sense of entitlement that Ava had been carrying for a long time. For me, it was a moment of vindication. Those who once doubted my version of events could see with their own eyes that I had not been exaggerating. She lived in a world distorted by her selfishness. The story spread quickly in our social circle. People who previously gave her the benefit of the doubt immediately understood why I had maintained a strict policy of zero contact. Her attempt at reconciliation was no longer viewed as romantic, but as pathetic. Derek, who at one point witnessed some of her manipulative behavior, couldn't help but laugh about the situation while we were having beers that weekend. "She really thought she could just waltz back into your life?" he commented, amused. "As if you had been waiting for her to finish her fling with the photographer." What she didn't understand was that her big scene hadn't had the effect she was looking for. On the contrary, it had confirmed that ending the relationship had been one of the wisest decisions I had ever made. When I told Sophie what happened, she didn't react with jealousy or insecurity. Her concern was whether the incident had affected my job. "She seems incapable of taking responsibility for her own decisions," she said, with a rational calm that made me value her even more. "It's a good thing you realized before things got more serious between you two." 3 months after that episode at my office, Sophie and I were standing at the Baltimore cruise terminal with our suitcases ready and excitement bubbling. The Mediterranean trip that I had originally planned for a relationship that never deserved the gesture would now be a shared experience with someone who truly valued what we had. Sophie insisted on covering half of all additional expenses, excursions, special dinners, and activities. That attitude of fairness and commitment contrasted brutally with the way Ava had always treated our relationship, seeing me as an inexhaustible source of financial and emotional support. As we checked our luggage, I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was sharp, desperate and laden with barely contained hysteria. "Ian, wait, please." Turning around, I saw Ava forcing her way through the crowd. Her appearance surprised me. She had lost a lot of weight. Her clothes were baggy, and her hair was matted as if she had been constantly running her hands through it. I later learned she had spent weeks checking cruise departure schedules and monitoring our social media posts until she found a way to intercept us before boarding. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," she said, gasping, exhausted from running from the parking lot. "You're going to take her to the places we dreamed of visiting together." Her eyes held that dangerous mix of desperation and rage that caused several passengers to step aside. Sophie, next to me, remained calm, observing the scene with the same analytical distance one uses to watch a documentary about dysfunctional behavior. I took a breath and spoke with the tone I use when a client demands the impossible. "This is not your trip, Ava. You ended our relationship. You chose Logan over the life we were building." It was then that she broke and began a frantic speech. She said Logan had been emotionally abusive and controlling, that he had left her isolated and dependent on him. She cried, claiming that I was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and that she deserved a second chance for our 3 years together. "You never would have treated me like that. You always cared about building something real with me," she sobbed. The irony was that everything she described about Logan was exactly what she herself had done to me, using me as financial support while investing her emotions in someone else. But arguing with someone so lost in their own narrative would have been cruel and utterly useless. "I'm sorry for what Logan did to you," I replied with sincerity. "But our story ended the night you chose him. Sophie and I are building something new. You have to respect that." It was as if her last defenses crumbled. What followed was a complete breakdown that captured the attention of dozens of passengers and Port Authority personnel. "You can't do this to me," she cried, her voice echoing throughout the terminal. "I gave you the best years of my life. You owe me more than this." The security guards reappeared, approaching quickly as Sophie and I walked toward the boarding line hand in hand. I did not look back, not because I didn't care, I once did, but because that chapter was definitively closed. When we passed through security and boarded the ship, a serene silence enveloped me. It was not the silence of doubt or guilt, but of a deep peace that comes when you know you made the right decision. Sophie leaned on my shoulder as the ship prepared to sail. Outside, the bustle of the port was left behind, just like a story that no longer had power over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the burden of looking back, only the desire to move forward.